crises at once at the moment. We've got a climate change crisis, and we've got a global economic crisis. 3 years ago, the rich and powerful of the world, the corporations, the governments, they were going to try and do something about climate change. They weren't going to do enough, and they were going to try and do it through the market, but they were going to try. Now, with the economic crisis, they figure they can't afford it. That's what happened at the Copenhagen talks. But whenever the banks are in trouble, they come up with the money immediately.
When the international financial system came close to meltdown, the government injected in excess of £1 trillion to bail out the banks and the speculators, who were in fact the cause of this crisis. The budget deficit that this has created has now been used as a pretext to launch an attack on all the major social gains working people have acquired in the post-war years.
When the Second World War started, the governments of all the major powers redirected their whole economies to make as many weapons as possible, as fast as possible, to kill as many people as possible to win the war. It lifted the whole world out of the Great Depression. We have to do the same thing now, but in order to save lives.
1 million climate jobs is a solution, or the beginnings of a solution to the environmental and the economic crisis.
Think of all of the economic benefits and the health benefits, that, you know, green future is a really positive future.
We need the clean technology, but we also need the jobs. So there's just a lucky series of coincidences, if you like, that we're desperate for jobs, we're desperate for new technology, and hey presto, the new technology is getting cheaper at the same time. So aren't we lucky this has all come together?
When they say job cuts,
we say carbon cuts.
When they say welfare cuts,
we say carbon cuts.
What do we want?
Carbon cuts.
When do we want them?
Now.
What do we want?
Carbon cuts.
When do we want them?
Now.
We have to stop burning coal, oil, natural gas, and we have to start using wind power and sun power, which don't make any carbon dioxide. Over 20 years, with the technology that we have now, assuming the technology doesn't get better, 1 million jobs will reduce the emissions in this country by about 75%.
The investment we're talking about initially is 52 billion. If you also then take out the savings that accrue from not having to pay benefits by creating jobs and the other economic benefits that flow from this, we estimate it's in the region of 20 billion. An important part of this debate must be around moving towards a fair and progressive system of taxation. There's an estimated deficit in the region of 150 billion, but 120 billion pounds a year is lost to the public purse.
Pay your tax! 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 Pay your tax!
There's a huge amount of paranoia deliberately instilled about the deficit, about the public sector deficit. Through huge phases of British history, the government's deficit has been considerably greater than it is now.
The public debt doesn't matter that much. Their actual payments on all of the deficit they've got is about 4% of the budget. That's all it is. What they're doing is the structural adjustment of Europe. Look at Greece. Massive cuts in Greece. Greek economy 6 months later in worse trouble. Look at Ireland. Massive cuts in Ireland. Irish economy 6 months later in worse trouble. This is economic disaster.
Investors is a clear example of how priorities of the country are not the priorities of businesses creating renewable energies. We needed more renewable energy in this country. They cared about more money, so moved to America where they can get more money for their products. if we follow the market, it doesn't control socially what we need to be controlling.
The alternative to that, I think, is an alternative based on the idea that we have some cooperation, we have some idea of community, we have some idea of collective need, and we try and address that through ways of organising that allow us to meet collective need. So the vision of 1 million climate jobs is, first of all, jobs that are about reducing carbon emissions, not just greenwash jobs. It's about jobs that are government jobs, which through a national climate service is how we've envisioned it, a bit like the NHS, a national climate service, where you can think about the kind of jobs that you do need to deal with this problem of reducing emissions. And you can allocate those jobs, you can think about those jobs with a bit of planning.
We need about 3 times as much electricity as we have now in order to do the housing and transport. And a change to renewable power is about 40% of the jobs, mainly offshore wind. A bit more than half of those jobs over the long haul are factory jobs. And the other half are seafaring jobs and shipbuilding jobs.
As much as 50% of all energy is used in buildings. We'll save half the energy by making our buildings more energy efficient by insulation, reducing drafts, putting in double glazing, changing the boiler. We'll save the other half by saying, well, what we're going to do is to have renewable energy.
And the next 30% at first would be public transport.
We need to provide people with affordable alternatives to motor cars. We will need a high-speed rail network where we can put all our passenger transport and we can free up the conventional railway that we've currently got to move freight. One freight train can take 40 lorries over roads.
There's going to be a reduction in the number of long-distance lorry drivers, but that's going to be far overbalanced by the increase in train drivers and particularly increase in bus drivers. That's half of the jobs in transport. The other half is making sure that the vehicles are run on electricity.
The main link between Seville and Madrid used to be through air. The high-speed link was built. Now over 90% of all journeys are done through the railway.
We brought together a coalition of people, residents, environmentalists, direct action campaigners, sympathetic politicians, trade unionists. Then we had enough clout to take on the national government and the aviation industry and the multinational corporations which back them and win.
There are lots and lots of jobs to be had in organic agriculture, good quality jobs that require quite a lot of expertise. Agriculture adds up to nearly 45% of total world greenhouse gases. We can feed 60 million people, more or less, with low carbon agriculture, provided there is more urban agriculture.
There's the potential for 1 million climate jobs, and yet the workforce isn't currently equipped to actually be able to deliver that.
Education and training to do those jobs, and education also so that we can actually talk about what the real crisis is about and think collectively in society about how we solve these problems.
Linking up with the students, and it's always been important, but around the low carbon agenda and more generally, absolutely crucial if we're going to have any impact as a union.
Students and workers, unite and fight!
We need all of the unions on board, not just some of them, and we need them to not just sign up to it, but to actively educate their members.
We can talk about workers' plans and how we can replan production so it's green and works for people. In Australia, you had the Builders Workers Union doing green bans and not building buildings that were ecologically destructive.
We have an opportunity now to take this into a movement of resistance, and that makes it a living debate about are these things possible.
A really, really important idea. I think we need to be building a movement that is thinking beyond the immediate goals of just stopping the cuts happening and actually moving towards a long-term solution.
With the student protests and the waves of civil disobedience that have been going on, I think people are starting to realise that governments aren't there to dictate to us what happens, we're here to dictate to the government.